I hope you're good. So synth cloning has become quite a hot topic in the last few years, and while it's probably more prevalent now than ever before, it's nothing new. And a case in point is the Studio Electronics Midi Mini from the late 80s, and no prizes for guessing that this was a clone of the Mini Moog Model D. So in this video we're going to have a little look at the features, and then try it out in a piece of music to see what it sounds like. So the original Mini Moog is one of the most famous synths of all time, if not the most famous synth of all time. So I'm going to assume that you're familiar with the original controls of the Mini Moog and not go over everything. I'm just going to talk about what they've added that wasn't on the original. So on the original Mini Moog, if you wanted an LFO, you had to take Oscillator 3, click it down into low frequency mode, turn off the Oscillator 3 control, which means it no longer tracks the keyboard and is just free running, and then that would be your LFO. So the first thing they've done is added a dedicated LFO. Now you don't have control of the wave shape, but you do have control of frequency. On the original Mini Moog, you have this mod mix, and all the way to the right, I think you had Oscillator 3, and all the way to the left, you had noise, or possibly the other way around. And then you could blend between those two sources, and via these modulation switches, and the mod wheel send those to these two oscillators and the filter. Now you have Oscillator 3 that way, and the LFO the other way, and anywhere in between. But if you want to go back to the way it was on the original Mini Moog, there's a switch over here which goes between noise and modulation, so you can go back to having noise or Oscillator 3 as your sources. The next thing they've added, you can see DVCF, which means Dynamic Voltage Controlled Filter, and that brings us conveniently down to these switches at the bottom. So over MIDI, using velocity, you have dynamic control of the VCA, so you have velocity sensitive control of the amplitude. You have dynamic control of the filter cutoff, and this is the sensitivity setting for that, which you have to balance with the envelope modulation of the filter, because that's also opening and closing the filter as well. So in order for that effect to be effective, you need to set that up right. Then we've got this mod switch here. So with it down, I think the mod wheel opens and closes the filter, and with it up, the mod wheel applies whatever modulation mix you've got to the filter and to the oscillators. You've got aftertouch for the VCF, you've got aftertouch to add modulation, and you've got Oscillator 2 sync. So Oscillator 2 will sync to Oscillator 1. And then you've got two sync sweep settings. There's F, which is the filter envelope, or O, which is Oscillator 3. And then you dial in the sweep and mount here. So you can do the kind of classic oscillator sync style sounds using the filter envelope, or you can do some different variations using Oscillator 3. The bend knob sets the bend range, which correlates with your pitch wheel on whatever controller keyboard you're using. So all the way to the right, it will give you a full octave, and then as you come down, you'll get smaller intervals of bend. Tune and glide were on the original. This wasn't, which is a MIDI channel selector. So we're on channel 1 at the moment, but you can just click your way around and choose whichever MIDI channel you're on. In the oscillator section, we've got this multi-trigger switch at the bottom. So on the original Mini Moog, the envelopes won't re-trigger if you're playing legato. You actually have to detach and then re-key in order for that to happen. And you can do that on the Midi, so it can be true to the original, but you've just got an additional mode where any keyboard trigger, even if you're playing legato, will re-trigger the envelope, so it just gives you a little bit more control. We've also got this priority switch. So there's low note priority, last note priority, or high note priority, so that just gives you a little bit more flexibility too. And then everything this way, apart from the NM switch, which I've already discussed, is exactly the same as the original. Quick look at the back, we've got MIDI in and MIDI through. We've got high and low outputs, and we've got an external signal in as per the original Mini Moog. You've also got all these little holes which are calibration points for various parameters, as you can see labelled. Okay, enough talking, let's make some music. So there we go, there was a quick spin through the Midi Mini from Studio Electronics. Now over the last 20 years or so, I've probably played a dozen Minimoog Model Ds, but I haven't actually played on one for about a year. So from memory, that does sound very much like a Minimoog. But to be accurate, ideally I'd have a real Minimoog Model D here so I could do a comparison, but I don't. But either way, I think it sounds really great. And the original Minimoog was quite a limited instrument. Whilst it sounded fantastic and is really musical and really usable, there's not that much to it. So there is scope to add functionality to it without cluttering it. And I think the additions they've put on the Midi Mini are really good and really usable. If you want more information on this instrument, there's more in the video description. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.